Hello, my name is Darren Thomas and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at facts and opinions in reading. So let's go ahead and see what we can learn. So we're going to, of course, define facts and opinions, and we're also going to look at examples of those in action and how facts and opinions work together. So facts are statements that can be verified. They can be tested to be considered true by someone else. So one person says something, one person discovers something, another person can check if that is correct or not, going through their own empirical process, if you will, as one way of doing that. And so we can test facts through observation, experimentation, experiences, or other means. And the main thing about facts is that they're primarily, almost always exclusively objective. In other words, something that is true is not true just for one person. It is something that is external. Again, I don't want to get too philosophical, but it's like an external reality. It is something that is true regardless of who observed it and who experienced it. Everyone can agree. And of course, I have an example. So if you look at this first bullet, it says here, and this is a fact, the average temperature of the human body is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a fact. So how do we know that this is correct? We can test it. So in other words, we can record the body temperature of one person using a thermometer. Someone else can record that same person's body temperature. You can then you go around and you can take the temperature of several people. It could be 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. You find the average and you can find out if this is correct or not. So the reason it is a fact is for several reasons below. Number one, it can be tested like I already said. Number two, it can be reproduced by others. In other words, other people can experience what you were saying. They can go out there, get their own data, do their own observation, and come up with the same results, if you will. And of course, it has also been found to be true. In other words, you don't just say something and then someone else goes out there and they can't get that same information. They can't test and prove it as well. They might get different information. If that is true, it's not a fact. Now, some common misconceptions between facts and opinions is that the opposite of a fact is not an opinion. The opposite of a fact can be considered false information or even misinformation. So if you look at the fourth bullet down here, it says the average temperature of the human body is 70.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this is not a fact. This is false information because when you test it, you're not going to get those results. When other people test it, several people through several samples or however they want to do it, it cannot be reproduced by others. And so it's not found to be true. So therefore it cannot be a fact. That is how it works. So this is not someone's opinion. The average temperature of the human body is 70.6 degrees. This is just misinformation. This is false information. And once you go through a process of gathering data and trying to verify what has been said here, you will realize that it is incorrect. Now, opinions are really different. Opinions are statements people make about their beliefs, their feelings, and or their judgments. So they kind of tend to be almost like personal. Like you cannot test or verify them like facts. They can be reasonable, which even we can argue about what it means to be reasonable. However, just because somebody says something about their experience doesn't necessarily mean that it is true, because opinions are subjective. They depend on the person, the place, the time, etc., where facts tend to often transcend that. Like when I gave the example about the body temperature, that is probably an all-time fact that goes back for as long as time can be remembered about the temperature of the human body. That is an established fact. Let's move on. So here's in this first bullet, we have our example of an opinion. I feel that America is the best place to study English. Now, this is the word that gets people in trouble. When we're talking about people's feelings, we're talking about how people are interpreting the world. It's their interpretation of what's happening around them that is making them feel a certain way, perhaps. And so feelings are subjective in that other people cannot test and verify them. You can observe it perhaps, but then people will have different interpretations of someone else's feelings. And so many times when working with students, they love to say, I feel, I feel, I feel. But what we want to do is like, we want to try to convey and to share information from the position of not just subjective feelings, but rather using facts to provide support for whatever it is that we believe. And so on the next screen in a second, I'm going to show you how opinions are okay when they are supported by facts, and sometimes facts and observations can lead to opinions. I'll show you that connection in a second. But to wrap this up, this is not necessarily, this example here on the screen is not bad. It's not a fact. And what happens is that people confuse their feelings with facts. There's nothing wrong with having feelings, in my opinion, no pun intended, but they need to be remembered that they are not facts, because you can't test them, you can't reproduce them, and they're not always going to be found to be true. It gets trickier there. Now, this next slide here kind of gives you an idea of how facts and opinions work together. And I'm bringing in ideas that have been discussed when I talked about main ideals and supporting details. So opinions can often be main ideals. I will demonstrate that more in a second. Facts are often used to support as supporting details. That's what they're there for. Because when you use facts to support your position or your opinion, it often strengthens your argument in a traditional academic sense. Okay, nowadays people want to talk about their feelings, and they use stronger, more violent feelings to try to support their feelings. And again, people are moving away from this ideal of supporting their opinions, which can be valid or invalid. It doesn't really matter. But they're developing opinions that are not supported by anything except more opinion and more feelings. So what we do here is that we use facts, like I just mentioned, to support our opinions. So I'm not going to read this entire sentence down or paragraph down here, but it starts by saying, I believe that America is the best place to study English. This right here is the main ideal. This right here also is the person's opinion. They're telling you exactly what they believe. And then the rest of this, they talk about a study here. Well, studies, they often produce facts. That's what they are. Okay, so they use a study to support their main ideal here. They use a study to support their opinion. Here's another one. Okay, so what this person is doing here is that they're starting with their opinion, which is their main idea, and they are using facts to support their main ideal. So the facts are the supporting details. That's what's happening in this paragraph. So a study by a researcher anonymous, another study conducted by Student University. Okay, this is what this person is doing here as they build the case that they believe America is the best place to study English. This is how they work together. Now, I want to wrap up with two more things, and that is the ideals of deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning, and to try to show you how facts and opinions can work in this context as well. So when we're talking about deductive reasoning, you start with the premise, we could say your opinion, and then you find facts, or you look for evidence that can support that opinion to see if you can verify it as potentially true. Again, I use true in air quotes, if you will. So someone starts with the opinion that smoking is bad for you. This is an opinion because, well, how do you define bad? I mean, that's where you start getting into messy stuff right there. All right. And so what this person is doing is they're sharing their thesis. They're sharing their main idea that smoking is bad for you. And so as they build their argument in an attempt to persuade, opinions are about persuasion. You have a certain belief and you want to try to get other people to share this belief as well, or you want to defend why you have a certain position. And so what do? You use facts, you use evidence, if you will, to provide support for your position. So again, fact one, that could be a study, research about how smoking causes cancer. Fact two could be more research, how smoking does this. It could be things you observed, how you saw your brother or your uncle get sick and die from smoking or whatever. And what's happening here is that you don't just rely on your feelings. I feel smoking is bad, or it hurts me when people smoke, because those are subjective and they're hard for other people to verify and confirm. They can be persuasive from an emotional standpoint, but if you're going from a traditional academic sense of trying to develop arguments and to persuade the mind, relying on the emotional power is often not the best approach that is used in many contexts. Now, inductive reasoning is when you start by, you have facts or you have observations or experimentations, and then you develop an opinion, you develop an interpretation about that. So the thing that's happening with inductive reasoning is that you have evidence, but you're trying to interpret it. What does this mean? What does this mean? And this is where, again, when people get into research, they have all these cool results, and the results are valid or correct, but then they start to make leaps in their interpretation, and that's where you start to have problems. So when you are doing inductive reasoning, you have your facts. So you read a study here, you read a study there, you have this experience with this person or that person, and then it leads you to the opinion or the conclusion, if you will, your interpretation of these things that you've seen and experienced, that smoking is bad for you, as you can see right here in the example. So with deductive, you start with your premise or opinion, and you look and you try to find evidence that confirms this if possible, because you might find evidence that does not confirm it, which when you reject it, basically. But with inductive reasoning, you've already had this data, and so now you're trying to line it up and say, what does this mean? What kind of conclusion can we draw or infer from these things that we found? And this is how facts and opinions work together. And it is very, very important to understand the difference between them. Having an opinion is not bad per se. Again, that's my opinion. Using facts is not bad per se. Again, that's my opinion. But understanding the difference between these two and how they work together to support an argument is critical going forward, not only in the development of your own writing, but also when you are looking at the reading or the writings of other people and trying to assess what they're trying to say. All right. So let's recap this and wrap up this particular presentation. Facts are true and testable. They are objective, and they are often used as supporting details when people are writing. And so when you're reading, you have to be aware of that. Opinions cannot be tested. Smoking is bad for you. Well, what does that mean? I believe America is the best place to study English. Well, what does that mean? Tell me why. Their opinions are also subjective, and opinions are very powerful to be used as main ideas. When you are reading someone's writing, the main ideas often are opinions. They're trying to stimulate your thought process. They're trying to persuade you. They're trying to challenge your thought process. And then they line things up by providing facts and evidence. Although sometimes they can be a little sneaky about that, and you'll learn more about that later. But this is the general gist of how these things are approached. So, my name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. I want to thank you again so much for listening. See you in the next video, and you take care.